like your screen image. I like being able to do that, photograph into a drawing.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Thank you. It was an app.
Oh, that's very
cool.
slick.
Yeah.
Well, I love that it was totally appropriate for what we're talking about today.
Maybe we could have we use the app and just have that of us up on
That's right.
screen, Pam. We're going to spend just a few minutes, folks, letting everybody in because it's going to take a few minutes. And several of our students, it's great to see you.
As Elaine is admitting people, we'll say welcome. I'm Pam Rutledge. I am joined today by my partner in crime, Jerry Lynn Hogg. And
Hi, everybody.
A lot of you know us, but a lot of you don't. So we're really here to talk about technology use in a way that really fits whatever your questions are. So never hesitate to, put your hand up, interrupt, ask a question, because otherwise we'll just diesel on. I'm going to go ahead and share screen now.
We do want to make it as interactive as possible, so do feel free, and we'll go back and forth, but we will be trying to monitor the chat in case there are some questions.
So have you got the chat open, Jerry-Lynn?
No, I'm going to do that right now. That's such a great idea, since I said I'd be monitoring it.
Always good. So our topic today is healthy technology use. And so one of the questions that we have for you is, what is it that you're thinking about when it comes to technology use or even technology? Here's sort of a rough agenda of the topics that we're going to address. One is, what concerns or issues do you have, as I just said? And then we're going to go through some of the ways that people think about technology use and talk about how you get to a point where that use can be healthy. And then we'll address a couple of very specific concerns that people sometimes have, which is screen time and screen addiction, Zoom fatigue, and doom scrolling, and describe what those are and solutions to manage them. And then we'll talk about some tips for managing your digital life. It was interesting to me this morning. I talked to the press a fair bit, and one of the recent questions that was published today was whether or not Meghan Markle should have canceled all of her social media accounts, which is really an interesting question, because from a mental health point of view, it was probably a really good idea for her. From a marketing point of view, given that she's an actress and now a public person who uses that persona to generate income for her foundation or speaking opportunities or however they're going to live now, not having an online social media presence is a real liability. So there's an interesting balance between what you're trying to do and the ramifications of doing it on social.
So what we'd like to do now is have everybody use chat, type in the chat box, and what is your number one tech concern? So we put several up there. Maybe you have something that's different than that, but if you could each type in the chat box, and we'll pull this together. Interesting, because we're seeing 3 rise to the top so far.
I'm good. I'm glad you can count. I can't count that fast.
So I know people are still putting it in, but the three that I see coming to the top are misinformation, addiction, and social disconnection. But that does not mean those are the only ones. Some people have both misinformation and addiction. Cognitive impairment comes up quite a bit too. Privacy issues is mentioned, privacy, and Kai, it doesn't click. You just have to kind of put it in there in the chat. This is not an interactive form up on the slide. So privacy, misinformation, addiction,
Sort of the whole shopping list, only we hadn't listed privacy specifically here, but
right.
but
It's brought up quite a bit, even without us listing it here. And then some of the time, the addiction is with the impact on teenagers. So children also seem to surface on several of them.
So I think we can talk about every one of those issues and strategies for thinking about them. Let's try thinking about what exactly do you mean when you mean technology? I mean, if you think about it, we have technology we use for work, we have technology we use for leisure to connect with people, but it also includes things like the GPS in our car and mobile apps and our fitness programs. I don't know how many of you have a Peloton, but Jerry Lynn and I meet on Peloton every Friday for a ride.
And we live 3,000 miles away.
And we live 3,000 miles away. That's right. Alexa, Siri, I don't know how many of you ask Google Assistant lights and smart devices, Apple Watch, Fitbit, the things that give you information about your behavior. And I can control my vacuum cleaner from my smartphone and my new toy, which is my sous vide water heater. So there's all kinds of ways that we're using technology. And so when people talk about technology is bad or we need to take a technology break, it's really important to distinguish exactly what people mean. And as all of you as fielding community, you know that part of research is operationalizing your question and trying to find a way to think about something in a specific way so that it's generalizable to something else. When we reduce all of that complexity down to media or technology, or when we just assume that people are referring to social media, we're losing sight of a lot of the interrelatedness and a lot of these complex mechanisms. And by simplifying it and reducing it, it's very easy to fall prey to the sort of blanket accusations of problems. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would also go on to say that, particularly during the pandemic, but in general, when we're tired, stressed, etc., we can ramp up emotionally and engage with it a lot easier.
Right. So it's important to think about what it is you're doing, but to think about how do we think about the technology and the impact so that we're not just buying a party line or falling prey to a headline that we see in a newspaper about the evils of technology, but that we're starting to think about it in a more complex way. So what we'd like to do is start with an exercise where we'll break you all into groups and have you think about different pieces of technology. So Jerry Lynn has typed these different examples of technology into the chat window. And within your group, each group will get one. Try and follow the number unless you really hate it, and then pick another one. But we'd like you to work together in a small group and answer these questions. What are 3 ways that this technology connects humans to each other? What are 3 ways in which this technology disconnects humans from each other? Was this technology disruptive? What did people do without this technology? Did they use something else instead? What was the world like before this came along? And then did it make life better or worse? So Jerry Lynn, do you want to divvy people up?
So I'm going to send you into breakout rooms. Use the number that is listed, but we're not going to have 12 breakout rooms. So if for some reason you hate the one you got, you can pick one of the ones on the bottom, 10, 11, and 12. But you'll be sent to a breakout room. Do you want to capture those questions so that you can remember what you're going to talk about? We're going to send you into the breakout room. We asked you to take your topic and go over it. And Pam, any other directions before I sent them out?
But I mean, we could, I suppose, copy and paste the questions into the chat window. I didn't think about that until now. But so let me just reiterate them for you. Number 1 is the telephone. 2 is the automobile. 3 is the transistor radio. 4 is the microwave. 5 is the laptop. 6 is the light bulb. 7 is an iPod or any MP3 player. 8 is a movie camera. 9 is a bicycle. 10 is a smartphone. 11 is a bow and arrow. And 12 is a television.
So just in case you haven't been in the breakout rooms before, a screen will pop up and you'll click on it. If you don't, it'll automatically take you there in a minute. And then when the breakout room is closing, you'll get a notice 60 seconds and then you'll be popped back to us. All right. Any questions before we go? All right. See you guys in a little bit. We got people coming back. Welcome back, folks.
I lost my chat window. Oh, there it is. Everybody survived.
Yeah, there's still folks coming back. They've got another 15 seconds to come back.
Racing down the hall.
Exactly. They must have had lively conversations because they're not jumping back willingly very quickly. All right, I believe we have everybody back now. Is that right?
Awesome. Well, before we hear what you guys decided, I just wanted to put up how the initial feedback came in on the concerns about technology. This slide that you're looking at now is the state of the issues, and it really shows you how much people are worried about addiction, but I think also how much addiction gets talked about in the media. So it's sort of a double-edged sword on that one. But we'll talk about all these things as we go along. Jerry Lynn, you want to review what they were doing?
Right. So remember, and what we'd like you to do is each group to report out. So remember the kinds of questions you'll be answering is with your particular piece of technology. What were 3 ways this technology connected humans to one another? What are 3 ways this technology disconnected humans from one another? And was this technology disruptive? What do people do without this technology, or what did they do without it? And did they use something else instead? Was it a replacement or disruptive? And did this technology make life better or worse? So let's have group 1 report out. And do you have a head speaker, or do you all want to unmute?
We didn't really select a speaker.
Okay. But Elizabeth,
I'll
you
go
a
ahead and
good one.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start, but if Marcia or anyone else wants to chime in, please do. So we had the telephone, which was a very good one to start. We discussed that, originally the telephone helped connect people more quickly because they didn't have to wait for, the letter and such. And it could cover distance quite a bit better than a letter or, a horse rider or someone walking. So we had speed and distance. In terms of disconnection, we felt that there was something about eavesdropping, because we talked a little bit about the original phones were like party lines. So it enabled a certain amount of eavesdropping and gossiping. And we talked a little bit about how, again, that speed of communication was sped up. And so bad news traveled fast may have come from that era. So that was a bit about the good and side, that you could talk to people quickly, but then bad news could travel fast. And it would prevent some people from maybe going out. I think Marcia mentioned that people would make a point to go out on Sunday to church for social, to see people. And if you had the telephone, maybe you didn't feel as compelled to go out for your weekly activities because you could just call during the week. And we decided that definitely the telephone was disruptive. Without that, people had, letters, or they had to go see people in person. And let me see. I think overall we agreed it made life better, but you still needed to make sure you had a sense of control over your message, and a certain amount of managing expectations using it. Again, going back to the party line and how other people could communicate your message for you more quickly. And it may not be how you'd like it to be put out there.
Yeah, and
So am I missing anything else, group people?
that also led to us talking about the spread of misinformation and how that kind of spread more quickly as well during that age. And it almost made me feel better knowing that it wasn't something new. It's just part of human society. And although we have this technology that's spreading it even faster than ever before, it's not something new, and it hopefully is a problem we can tackle. That's all I had to add.
I think that's a great point, because there were yellow sheets during the Civil War, where people were trying to propagandize one position or another. So it's not like misinformation is a new concept, but it's pretty clear that every technology makes an impact on the speed and the breadth of distribution. I remember my grandmother with her phone in the party line, complaining about who wouldn't get off the phone. And so you're right, control becomes a big issue with technology, which was one of the people talked about, is who's in charge here.
The other thing that we mentioned is that the phone in today's world, not only as it serves the purpose of talking, but you get the text message now, and how there's almost this expectation that you're going to, that people are going to have access to you 24/7.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that would be a theme of this, is how do you take, we've given ourselves permission more or less to set boundaries in offline, right? We talk about that. We've talked about it for a long time, and when to say no and all that stuff. But all of this new technology, we haven't really figured out how to set personal boundaries with technology. So you're absolutely right, Marcia, that there's this, especially among students, this expectation that if they text you, you're supposed to be on it, man. At the same time, texting allows for, I think of it like attachment theory, like the toddler coming and touching, that it provides a touch point that you might not have otherwise. So my daughter and I will text sometimes several times a day, inconsequential things, but it creates a feeling of connectedness, even though nothing was, particularly meaningful at all. So it's very interesting how our assumptions about and meaning that we attribute to these things. I think those are wonderful points.
And Pam, talking about that, also the level as far as the contact, email versus text versus a phone call. I usually, the lines for text for me are closer contacts and family members. And then I would revert to a email for, someone that's maybe just colleagues or associates in those kinds of ways. So really interesting. Anything else from group one, or are we ready to go to group two?
I would just add something completely from a different place. But my children have just moved to Scotland, and in going back and forth, I tried to order some books from a bookstore there, and I've discovered that in Scotland, a week to answer an email is a perfect norm, standard practice. So culturally, different groups have defined the response differently.
That's such an important point, Kay. I'm really glad you brought that up, but that's such an important point. And there's probably even culturally within the United States in different
Oh, for
groups.
sure.
Yeah.
And we're associated with a university that conducts a lot of the operations in an online environment. So we probably are looking at one of the more rapid versions of expectations around response.
Yeah,
Well,
it makes
great.
you
I'm-
wonder whether the pace of a culture, because I'm not familiar enough with Scottish culture, but whether the pace of a culture reflects in the texting. You know, we used to spend a good bit of time in Maui, and there's definitely a different time pacing in Maui. And so it makes me wonder, is their expectation about texting also, you know,
It,
Whoops,
You're
Kay,
muted.
you went muted.
oh, sorry. They have talked about how people stop and talk with you and carry on extended conversations. And so they're in a small village or town, but how the pace of life is just a lot slower. So yes, it's a reflection of the larger culture.
And
so
I love this point that Carolyn put in the text, and that she said her father, that the two of them have a weekly Wednesday text just saying happy Wednesday. So there's these touch points that texting has allowed us that we didn't have before. And I have to say, I have similar types of things happening with my family members. So very cool. Thanks, Carolyn. All right, so group 2.
I'll step out and my other two colleagues can join in, but we
What
had the
technology?
microwave.
Oh, okay.
And initially there were just two of us. Alton came in later. Well, he's camping. And so he was having
my
problems
God.
with this.
Now I am
technology.
impressed. That
that's
really
dedication.
I thought so. But initially we thought that the microwave didn't really connect people or disconnect people. It was a technology that has mostly to do with making it easier and faster to cook foods. And so neither of us thought that living without a microwave would be one of us lives without one, and I live without one for 3 months when I'm on my boat. So we could both get along without them. Alton found more uses. He talked about more uses in the office, taking something to the office where you could heat it up quickly. And we were wondering about whether there were commercial or larger kinds of applications for microwaves that we were unaware of. But in the home, it didn't seem to be a particularly disruptive technology. Convenience, but you could always and can still do without it. So we didn't think we were particularly better off or worse off from that particular technology. So others want to chime in?
Yeah, I'll add 2 points that, yeah, we should probably speak our bias from the beginning, right? That I don't have a microwave, so I'm not going to think that is helpful. And Kay said she didn't, she lives perfectly happily. And I wonder, Alton, in the Airstream, maybe you don't have a microwave while you're camping either. So we were a group perhaps that were given the microwave to discuss, and none of us have that. But the other point that I had considered is that I think they tried to make the technology disruptive. When microwaves first came out, there were cookbooks about how you cook everything in the microwave, right? You cook your turkey in the microwave, like everything could be done that. We don't use it that way. It didn't become disruptive as perhaps they had hoped maybe it would be.
So I don't know if Alton's going to jump in or not, but I just wanted to put one thing out there for you guys. What about the culture of sitting down at a table with the family, and that the microwave allowed you instead to heat something up quickly, or for people to come in at different times and be able to take the leftovers of the meal and heat it up, or that sort of built-in need of cooking and all sitting down together while the meal was hot and prepared, and whether that made any difference at all.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm
I
gonna
brought
play
in-
devil's
And I-
advocate on
I
that one.
brought in that point.
Okay, go for it. What's that?
Yeah,
Okay, somebody
I
else
would-
is talking here. Go ahead.
Hello?
I would counter.
Yeah, sorry,
I would
the
counter.
internet's bad. I was saying, yeah, I brought in that point around how it brought people to, like, the oven pretty much brings people together during gatherings. But with the microwave, I was talking about TV dinners, that period of time when people used to do that, and how it was being sold as something that could be quick, and allow you to make food and prepare food quickly, so you could have more time with your family. And I was comparing that to the new hot pot thing where it cooks things in 15 minutes, the sous vide machine, and how now, because you cook things in 15 minutes, you have more time with your family. That's kind of how I was looking at the microwave also in relation to current tech.
Yeah, I was going to take that side too, although my sous vide machine actually cooks things slower, but the Instant Pot is awesome. Was that it freed you up? I'll tell you, when you're a new mother, the ability to heat a bottle in a microwave is a big plus in terms of how long you have to spend preparing, the bottle versus the amount of attention that you can then give back to whatever is going on with the baby. So I think that it was, as you say, not disruptive. I mean, I would totally agree with that, but it allowed control over choices and time. And one thing I think it does in the office, and alternate, you can speak to whether or not you agree, when you can heat something, I mean, you can't really cook in the office, right? You don't really even have time to like make an oven and heat some, but when you can heat something, it increases the aroma. And so it creates more of a food sharing experience in a more multisensory way. So I think that there's potential there for connecting people through scent that would not have happened otherwise if you were all just brown bagging it. Traditional.
Oh yeah,
brown
we've
bagging.
used that in our office. The whole idea with the office potluck, it allows for that. Yeah. Mhm.
Interesting. Very cool.
Yeah, and I am impressive what you guys were able to do with a microwave. So group number 3.
Okay, it's Janine. I'm gonna speak for my group.
Okay.
I had also Pablo and Kathy, so they can jump in. We have the transistor radio. So I did have to look it up. I was born when that was out, but I still wanted to refresh my recollection. The 3 ways it connected, we had the spread of information. So looking at that more as news, mass media, and spreading information that way. So maybe it would be your local, and now you'd get regional or national, right? And then also entertainment, taking that with you. We think of the boombox, right? That was the image that kind of came up. Or just having a picnic at the beach, or listening to a ball game together. And then as far as 3 ways that disconnect, we thought about that as even ideologies. The more information you get, sometimes that can cause arguments, right? And then also we did talk about too, because at one time there were radio shows that we were talking about, like War of the Worlds, Orson Welles, and how we also mentioned about sitting around the table. Maybe somebody wanted to listen to something versus coming down to sit at the table to have a discussion. So that could be kind of disruptive and a distraction. And then even thinking about communities where people would gather in neighborhoods on their front porches to have discussions. Instead of maybe doing that, then they went inward to the inside of their homes, right? And then let's see, what's the next one is. Was it disruptive? I think we all agreed that anytime something is introduced, it becomes disruptive. And we did think about the example of War of the Worlds, how that really, it wasn't disinformation because there wasn't the intent to, spread rumors, and but it was misinformation, or it was perceived as this was actually happening, right? Aliens were landing and really caused a problem. So there was a sensationalism too to that. And maybe even with McCarthyism, I don't know, but if people were listening to certain politics, that could be also another way that it could have been disruptive. Did it make life better or worse? I think we all, and guys jump in if I'm saying something that you want to jump in about, but we thought that it made life better because you're getting more information. But Pablo, I also think you said you sort of felt there was a flip side to it because there's always pros and cons to everything. So maybe some of the ways it connected people, were no longer in existence, where people weren't doing the same things anymore. Their routines had changed.
Right. And just thank you, Janine. You summarized that all pretty well. And just to kind of reiterate some of the other examples we used was, just the same technology that could connect families could also disconnect them. Like I know from my mom's personal experience, their family was pretty poor. And so she would go to her friend's house to, use this piece of technology with her friend. And that kind of disrupted her family tie with her own family just because she couldn't share those experiences. Or perhaps the ball game that connected two friends together, maybe they were rooting for different teams and it could have been that the radio disrupted their friendship because one team won over the other. So that's what we talked about.
I think that to me, the most interesting thing about the transistor radio, aside from the distribution of information, is that the portability. It was the first time that you could take media with you other than printed. And so I think of the images that we have of kids in the city, dancing around, the beatbox, or the sort of shared cultural experience, which I think is pretty profound. And one of the definitions for a disruptive technology is it simple and cheap enough that a lot of people can have it? And that was certainly the case of the transistor radio, because there were lots of sort of cheap versions of it, and you just stuck some batteries in it and off you went. So it was in that sense disruptive in that it gave all elements of society an opportunity to have access to information that they might not have had. I don't know, Pablo, what to do about people who root for different teams, but I'm not sure that's the radio's fault.
Well, great job, you guys. Let's go to group number 4. And what was your technology?
Our group was, I thought we were group 2. We did automobile. We haven't covered that one yet.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, great. And Martin and Josie and I were in a group together. So we had the automobile. 3 ways that this technology connected humans was, we talked about the ability just to be able to get together, like to be able to meet up with family, meet up with friends, be able to get to town. But we also really acknowledged our rural roots here in America, right? Like what a difference this made for our farmers and our growers, because they were able to get access to new markets, were able to sell beyond the close community. One example, just like when there's, like if you're in a valley and you've got mountains to get over, it's much harder to get horses and buggies and things like that up over the mountains to buy and sell goods or get access to them. So the automobile had some tremendous advantages, right, for being able to do that. And then it also created this access to where you could get access to other parts of the country, because you could drive for education, you could drive for jobs. And so it really, that's what created a lot of the mobility. And then we talked about ways that it disconnected, and we had a really sweet example from Josie, and I can't remember if it was your grandmother, I'm suspecting it was your great grandmother, but she talked about how her grandmother's or great grandmother was concerned about the disruption to the family, right? That it took multiple families in order to survive, in order to make enough food or to farm the land or to prepare whatever they needed. And that the families really stuck together and entertained together, ate together, worked together. And then the automobile was very disruptive. There were families started to disperse, and they didn't have to really rely on one another for their survival and for that social network. And so, that really, that was really a big changer. And I brought in an experience, like I've done work in Kenya, and their automobiles are not very affordable for the majority of people. And so in that culture, there's a lot of journeying that goes on to meet people, whether it's by walking or bicycling or taking a bus for a whole 1 or 2 days. And so then it changes the dynamic even today, that if we're meeting, even for a business meeting, we're eating together and staying in people's homes. So there's this pace is very different. Somebody mentioned that, right? Change the pace. And I think too, cultures are in different places. And clearly the automobile was a disruptive technology. The other thing, when we talk about, like, we would say, hey, it made life better. We would not go on without the automobile. But we also brought up what's happening with our kids today. Like, I have a 14-year-old son who's in the technology, gaming, social media, online school, all of that. And so I look on this generation with concern about what is this doing to their social fabric and their, self-confidence and isolation and all of those things. And my view seems so similar to the great grandmother's view about the automobile, like how it's disrupting our social fabric. And yet, like, we don't know what it was like to live without the automobile. My son doesn't know what it's like to live without social media and access to all of this stuff. So it's just interesting that, like, that was so disruptive. The volume of this technology for our youngest generation is so disruptive. And yet looking back, we'd say, we'd take that technology change.
Those are wonderful points, especially the way that the automobile allowed for more distributed living. In other words, you could live farther from your job, you could live farther from the people that you needed to see. So I think that was a pretty profound change. But I think that what you sort of summated with was brilliant, which is that we can only look at these things through our own lens. So social connection to your grandmother was a completely thing than social connection to your son. And it doesn't make the one or the other any more meaningful. We might, if we're non-digital, because my age betrays me, have more affinity for one over the other, right? I didn't grow up online. Nevertheless, so I think the lens we use is incredibly important in how we evaluate technology, and recognizing that bias is very important. So I think those are wonderful points.
Yeah, a great discussion. So our last group, which may be number 5 or maybe just the last group, can we get you to report out? If you think you're talking, we don't hear you yet. So laptop. Which group had a laptop? All right, a few people said they had to run. I don't think we lost them, but it could be we lost that group.
Did we lose an entire group?
That's interesting. Okay. Going once, going twice. All right. I think we had great discussion. I think the point of this was well taken. I don't know what happened to our laptop people, but.
Right. So yay, we did the discussion. Good for us. So what I want to argue here, which I think fits really nicely, Jackie, with where you ended up, is that what it's good technology use is really about figuring out what you want to do and whether or not the tools at your disposal help or hurt, whether it's the car or the microwave or VR or your smartphone or whatever. It's really a question of looking at use versus goals. And the challenge is that goals drive everything. And that's something that as a society, we're not very good spending time doing. It's much, we're much more like, oh, that's good, that's bad, that's different from when I grew up. That's not how, my grandfather walked, 2 miles uphill both ways in the snow. That we make judgments without thinking about the goals. And so what I would urge all of you to do as you're thinking about technology use is evaluating use versus goals, and then thinking very carefully about what you measure when you're making an evaluation. Because right now, one of the biggest measures in media literature is screen time. And that is a very problematic measure. So I would encourage you to not just buy the next headline that says screen time causes X, because it's very likely that it doesn't. First of all, no two researchers agree on screen time. They all define it differently. It's all self-report. And there's little evidence that screen time itself is the problem causer. The screen time research that does exist is correlational, not causal. It describes, of course, an association. You're all researchers, you all know that. The important thing is that it does not consider other factors. It does not consider the content, what device they're using, how old they are, where they are in cognitive development, or maybe more importantly, their social or physical environment. For example, if you're talking about kids who have no availability of some playgrounds or outdoor play, then measuring screen time is almost irrelevant in terms of their quality of life, because there's a lot other stuff going on, parental supervision, all of that stuff. So I just, I love this chart because this always reminds me a lot of the research I see, which is that we look at a relationship and we assume that there's some causality. So in this case, ice cream causes drowning. You've probably seen this. There's a lot of very specious correlations that are a lot of fun. Engineering degrees in mozzarella cheese. But the confounding factor here, like the kids with high screen time who can't go to a park, is it was summer, right? You eat more ice cream in summer and people swim more and they drown more. But if we don't ask those questions of what else is going on here, we're going to start making mistakes about what causes what.
I mean,
Yeah.
Kay made a perfect example with the cultural part of
Right.
Scotland. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, the meaning that we imbue something. The other thing about research, first of all, journalists don't know how to read research. So correlation goes to causal very quickly in journalism. But their job is to get eyeballs on headlines, not to be scientifically accurate. So, we'll cut them some slack. But there's also a difference between statistically significant, which is what we all care about on our dissertations, and something that is material or big enough to matter in the real world. So digital screen time accounted for less than 1.9% of observed variability in sleep outcomes. That's statistically significant, but 1.9% says, what else is going on that's accounting for the variability of sleep outcomes? Digital screen time accounted for less than 0.25% of happiness measures. That's statistically significant. But it tells us that there's a lot of other stuff going on. So it's the other stuff going on that matters, and the part that I'm always so interested in finding out, because I like to look at technology from a very fundamental point of view, which is people do things based on goals, whether they're to admit them or not. And the technology either helps or hurts. And so what are people trying to do? So then I can judge whether the technology is going to help or hurt. If you start there, it makes things much easier. But the problem, as you all know, of folk psychology is that, like misinformation, it's appealing, right? Because generally it's fear mongering a little bit. And we also have a tendency to believe in things that are scary, right? Confirmation bias, if we believe in it, it sounds right. It makes sense that watching screens would keep you up at night. All of these things, including this perception we have of a digital dualism, that real life is somehow separate from online. Whereas especially those of us who are in the fielding community know that it moves across platforms in different kinds of ways. And, some of it is, would be replicated in other ways face-to-face if you were there. But for the most part, our lives moving across these things, and we don't change, going online to offline. We're just in a different social environment.
And getting back to some of the technology that we talked about, how is that different from a phone? So if I'm calling Pam and we're 3,000 miles away, are we connecting more or less if we do a Zoom call or other technology versus being in person? I do a lot of research in augmented and virtual reality, and constantly talking about if you're in person or not, in real life and virtual life, etc. I believe eventually we're going to get to a place where we're really not defining it so specifically, and rather talking about what kind of sense of presence we're bringing to those moments.
Yeah, and meaning, and what's the best way of doing something, right? We have a choice, Jerry Lynn and I, right? We could meet, we could email every week. We could talk on the phone every week. We could not talk to each other at all, or we can Zoom. And so given that we're 3,000 miles away and that we're good friends as well as colleagues, we choose to use the technology that gets us the closest together under the circumstances. And so I think if we recognize the constraints that reality gives us, there's two ways of looking at technology. Is sort of like what we have today is our gold standard, because that's what I grew up with, by God, and that's the right way to do it. And the technology's over here. So what's the matter between here and here? What's wrong with this picture? If we go over here, what am I missing? Another is, where does reality fall short? And what are we gaining from technology that's in that gap? And I think if we can look at it from both ways, we get not only, sort of a better personal judgment, we get better regulations, right? Because the trouble with weak science is you get bad advice. The American Academy of Pediatrics had this 2x2 rule. You've probably all heard it, right? No screen time under the age of 2, only 2 hours a day over the age of 2, right? That's still dieseling around out there. It doesn't matter that these guys have changed their mind, because there's not evidence to support that that's the right rule. But it's simple, made a good narrative, and it's out there embedded in Ember, man, with people believing it. The other thing is that when you scare people, you are setting them up economically to lose their money, right? Because you're signing up for things that don't exist. Cures for screen addiction, cures, digital detox workshops, all of this stuff, where if you started with your goals and evaluated those, you wouldn't need those things because you'd be making judgments. These are decisions based on emotion, not critical thinking, which is, of course, how we start making decisions anyway. In this environment, and then Jerry Lynn, I'll shut up and let you talk. I'm sorry.
No, you're doing fine. We had the whole big discussion of putting this together. So you're
I know, and she knows I never take a breath. It's really bad. Is that during COVID, I've heard so many people worry more than ever about a screen addiction during COVID. I mean, and aside from my big argument about don't measure screen time, what the hell? What are we supposed to be doing? We want to be able to keep our jobs, right? We need information. We're trying to figure out what mask to buy, or, soap to wash our hands with, or we're trying to keep our kid learning without being able to go to school. So all of these things, and we're trying to keep from going nuts. So all of this stuff would imply that if we can get stuff done that we would normally do face-to-face on technology, we're going to do it. And so worrying about how much we're doing using technology right now is not the right thing. If you're feeling isolated, if you're feeling sad or depressed, then figuring out a solution is the right approach, but not saying, oh, it's just the technology that's making me depressed, because you'd be crazy not to be a little bit depressed right now. That's sort of an oxymoron, but it's an anxiety-provoking time.
Yeah, and I just wanted to the, if you go back to that slide one more minute, Pam,
sure.
There's just, right now we are feeling more socially isolated than ever before, because we can't engage in the kind of in-person activities that we've often have done, and how grateful I am that we do have technology. I bet if I had everybody do a show of hands, how many of us have attended virtual graduations or virtual birthday parties, or even a few weddings in that kind of respect. Because I was the go-to tech person, I can't tell you how many people that have never been on the Zoom technology I've had to gently bring on so that they could attend some of these events. So this really gets back to what Pam's been talking about all along, is why are we using it? What are our goals for that? And to be thinking along those lines. And it doesn't mean that we can't use technology or screens in an addictive kind of behavior, but just blanket statement, make it be bad, isn't supported in the research. And there are a lot of positive outcomes as well.
Yeah, and when people talk about addiction in the press, they very rarely are using it accurately. They very rarely are using it as it is used by a clinician to define addiction. They're talking about excessive use, or they're talking about their frustration with their teenager who doesn't really want to listen to their parents. Duh. What teenager
That's
does.
almost healthy behavior, right?
Right. Oh my God, my kids would rather spend time with their friends on social media than talk to me. I mean, seriously. So there are times when you need technology, and there are times when you have to be aware of where it is not helping, right? In other words, that there's a tipping point, between good and bad, that if you're being aware, then you can take steps, right? So tech is enabling us to work from home. Yay, right? We can keep our jobs, right? There's a moment of gratitude for a lot of us, because there's a lot of people that didn't get to keep their jobs during COVID.
Mhm.
So I'm grateful that there's technology, because that's how I work, right? The bad news is we're having all these video calls, which I'll show you in a minute, how it disrupts normal physiological response. Also, do we have this lack of home facilities? I don't know how many, all the jokes you've seen about, Zoom meetings with the naked spouse, or the, kid throwing up in the corner, or the, here I am in the, in the basement with the, the laundry hanging over my head. So there's this issue of, when you have an office, it's set up to facilitate your job. You're not like sort of playing, army man trying to get through the day. Lack of privacy, inability to leave the office. And then dogs, kids, deliveries, vacuums, right? My husband just took the dogs upstairs with him because he was starting to think it was his turn. So there's all of these things that are going on, which means that the solution is not to turn it all off, but to recognize the limits. Set boundaries. Tell yourself it's okay to set boundaries. It's like people say, oh, all these people say mean things on Facebook. It's like, you can block them, right? It's like, well, what if they know? Well, so what if they know? If you're at a party and the people are unpleasant, do you hang around? No, you leave. So you make those judgments. Go ahead, Jackie, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, Pamela, I just wanted to say I appreciated your visual on the tipping point. And like this whole teenage world of like lots and lots of screen time. I appreciate you bringing out, hey, the difference between what the media is feeding us and the research. I'm not in the media program, so that was very helpful. And right, it's this balance. And so even though there's been lots and lots of screen time, I'm also acutely aware of balancing social interaction, because we've had the travesty of the teenage suicides within our friend network and within the community. And so it's balancing, like, how do we keep our kids connected? Yeah, they've got some responsibilities in school. And so it's not an easy thing to navigate, but it is trying to balance those. And I love, like, well, what's the goal? And for me right now, like, the goal is to keep my kids healthy enough to make it through this COVID season.
Right.
That's the primary goal.
I wonder if we'll start to see rebellion of teens not wanting to be on technology.
Mhm.
Almost because it's an interesting phenomenon.
But Julie, think about this. I mean, do you know a teenager who would prefer to text someone from across town than hang out together in the same place? you know, it's usually they're texting because they can't hang out in the same place, right?
Right,
Whether
right.
whether somebody's in English or the other guy's in geography or what, you know, they're doing it to maintain social connection. But I think that's such a great point. And, you know, it's very hard for me to understand when I watch my stepdaughter play Wildcraft, that that's actually a social event for her, because it looks really stupid to me, right? I mean, these, you know, wolves run around and, you know, and you grow baby wolves and you kill other animals so that you get more points so you can grow baby wolves, and you put on special outfits and you do all this stuff. But she does it with friends, which is gives them social capital, right? It's like what they talk about, because when you're 10, you're not talking about, you know, your innermost feelings, you're talking about stuff. And that's how you build friendships. So there's all these things going on at all these levels that I can't begin to understand when it comes to the gaming world, but that are profound in terms of their ability to build friendships, collaborate with others, reach out, all of that stuff that, you know, seems crazy if you're not a gamer, but is very real. So I think you're very smart to try and understand what your teen is getting out of this. How do you support them to stay connected? And I'm betting, because of how thoughtful you are about all of this, that you're having conversations with your teen about that. How do we keep you connected? What does it make sense for you to do? And if you can have those conversations with your kid about, you know, what you worry about, what they worry about, what you're trying to do, you will have such a good place in terms of navigating this whole tech world, because they now trust you enough to come to you when something comes up. If you've established that conversation where you're not saying, okay, you on that thing, like my parents used to do about the telephone. You're trying to understand and take advantage of it, which means he feels respected and is willing to will be willing to talk with you. So I think that's, I mean, it's just, you know, brilliant that you've been able to do that.
You know, I wanted to bring up one other thing when you were talking about, you know, work and tech behaviors, et cetera, and the dogs barking, etc. In many ways, it's now normalized, because before, dare you have one background noise or something, you were not being professional. And now we just sort of laugh and enjoy the dog barking, or
No makeup
parent,
days, yeah, right.
or the child coming in doing something goofy or what have you.
I love that, Draylin. That's such a great point, that this been kind of a great social equalizer. You know, your boss is in the same, you know, problems you're having, right? He isn't sitting in his big office with his big windows, like we're all in, you know, some corner of the kitchen. And so that part is very nice. It's gives people another point of connection. It humanizes the whole process in a way that doesn't happen otherwise. In other words, you can look into somebody else's home. And I don't mean judgmentally. I mean, you just have a sense of context that you would never have otherwise, which can be very profound in terms of how you think about someone.
Mm-hmm.
Let me just touch on a few things about Zoom fatigue and Zoom meetings, since we all do it all the time, to try and empower you to the importance of setting boundaries. Now, none of you may have any trouble with setting boundaries. I do, but you may not. But Zoom violates social norms, right? Because in a normal conversation, we'd be sitting around a table and you wouldn't all be staring at us and we wouldn't be staring at you, or we were looking at, you know, it's very unusual to look at people the way we look at them on Zoom. This continued eye gaze is a violation of intimacy with people that you don't know better. Right? Lags and overlaps means that we're continually interrupting, because I don't have the ability to sense viscerally when someone else wants to talk, or the sense to shut up so they can. It also has a burden of scheduling, right? So you want to get together with your family, you have to have a Zoom meeting, right? Which means you have to set a time. There's not dropping by. You don't drop by a Zoom meeting. Well, you could try, but usually no one's there.
Yeah, I was gonna say, good luck in making sure you get half the people there.
And the increased self-awareness of having to watch yourself while you're Zooming increases the cognitive load, because you know that you have to pay attention to the meeting, because that's what you do in meetings, but you're distracted because you're like going, oh, I really shouldn't wear that shirt when I do this, or whatever it is that you're like, oh my God, there's, I left the something on the couch. So you have this other little narrative going on in your head that you're continually needing to suppress to actually save your energy for what it is you're trying to do in the meeting. All of these things just are, which means you need to say, it's okay. There are some days when I'm going to do that, right? I'm going to put a sticky note right over my camera. I'm not even going to put my picture up. Or where you say, I've been on Zoom and we're doing it to you guys, this huge long time now. I'm going to take a break. So start that meeting without me. Whatever you need to do for self-care in terms of managing your mood when it comes to Zoom and these kinds of engagements is super important. And I want to encourage you to figure out what your limitations are. Some people are extroverts. They just love this stuff, right? I hate it, right? I am not an extrovert. But you have, we get to do it. So it's really important to figure out who you are. And again, going back to the goals, my goal is to get my job done for sure, but my goal is also to still feel good at the end of the day and not be totally exhausted and all of these other things. So that balance is critical. Jerry-Lynn, I'll let you do.
Yeah, well, and then I just wanted to, one more thing that I wanted to add to this is that idea of authenticity and transparency. So I'm exhausted. I maybe need to have my camera off, or we're spanning several different time zones and I haven't had lunch yet, but it would look rude if I were sitting there having my lunch, but I can maybe take myself off camera. What are people going to think if I'm off camera? And I've noticed that even within fielding, there's different cultures where the expectation is you're on camera all the time, and other groups where it's fine for everybody to be off camera. They just have their little post-it note picture there, and that's fine. I recently was holding a faculty meeting, and we span quite a few time zones, and we had the people in Europe, and one of them was sipping a glass of wine during the faculty meeting because it was maybe 8 o'clock at night. And then there were other people going, I can't believe she's drinking wine during a meeting. So anyway.
Well, I think that's the only way to attend a faculty meeting personally, but
but when it's 9 a.m. for you, it might not be so culturally
I don't know.
appropriate.
I'm willing to consider it.
Maybe so. I'm just noticing the time, Pam. So I do want to try to go through some of these quickly, but
do we want to go right to the end? If we've got 10 minutes, let's do.
Okay.
So, this slide was all about what we talked about, Jackie, with you, how smart you are to understand what's going on. And then the other thing I would say is being aware of the behaviors you model if they're important to you. So I suggest mindful media use. In other words, you pay attention. Why am I doing this? What do I want to accomplish? The best tool for this is to keep a media journal for a few days. You don't recommend it during COVID. You really don't, unless you're feeling something is problematic. But you want to know when you're using something, why you're using something, and then check in with yourself to see how it's making you feel. And if your emotional state is comparable to the goal that you're trying to get done. Because overall, I would say, think of these 3 C's, especially in the near term, right? You need compassion for yourself and others, right? COVID increases our media consumption. That's okay. Focus on the benefits, mood, connection, employment, entertainment, play, rather than worry about quantity and screen time. Have curiosity. We talked about this with your teen. Everyone has different tastes in media. It means different things to different people. Have a conversation. Listen, learn, share, demonstrate what you like. Let them show you what they like. Kids love it when their parents are stupid at something. So let them share with you. And then remember, the choice is always yours. The remote belongs to you. You can turn it off. You can delete any app from your phone. You can give yourself permission to set boundaries. You can say, Fridays, I don't Zoom. You can do whatever it is that you need to maintain your equanimity and maintain healthy media use? Jerry Lynn, I'll let you
All right.
state
So, yeah, so in
a
summary,
word.
we're really talking about the balance. So healthy media use is you being aware of why you're using it, how you're using it, and also be aware of how it's impacting you. So you don't want to be misled by screen time, because it isn't necessarily how many hours you have your eyeballs on the screen, and measuring that time isn't a great measure anyway, but rather, why are you using it and how are you feeling using it? And again, we've mentioned many times over, the connection that it's allowing us, particularly during the pandemic, is quite powerful. Again, emotions and your goals are critical, and those should be your evaluation tools instead. And then try to follow those 3 C's about compassion, curiosity, and choice.
So now we'll open the floor. We don't need to race off, although you all may want to. If anybody has anything they'd like to ask, talk about, mull over, we are more than happy to continue the conversation.
You mentioned the research that was not supporting this, 2 hours of social media time, all that stuff. Is that a source that you could post in the chat? Do you have something available?
Not that just directly says that. I mean, there's been a continual battle in media research in general. I probably can find where the Psychiatric Association sort of rescinded that and said, yeah, well, maybe that wasn't quite right. The other thing that I would recommend is one of our graduates actually runs a wonderful company called cyberwise.org.
I put it in the chat.
Oh, good. She has developed a digital citizenship curriculum for middle school students. She's been teaching it to a middle school near her for a number of years. And she
they're
has
now like
all
in
kinds of
48
resources.
states or something like that
Yeah.
now.
She has
In
all
her
kinds
book.
of, yeah, all kinds of
find it.
resources, and she has a wonderful, very practical, common sense book, Raising Humans in a Digital World. Diana Graeber is her name. So I would suggest go to her website and take a look, because there'll be all kinds of resources there. I doubt if there'll be research, and I will definitely look for you, Jackie, and see what we can find. It's a very good question, but the difficulty is all this research is like I said, it's sort of cherry picking operationalized variables rather than sort of thinking about the big picture. That's
Jackie,
how
also,
all
it's really, really
research in a
difficult.
field starts.
Yeah, it's really difficult for to do young children ethically, and to also determine exactly what's impacting and what's not. Think about grandparents FaceTiming with young children. Do you know a single toddler that hasn't grabbed their parent's phone or has some connection? So to completely eliminate technology, being exposed to it in some way or not, is very difficult now to do. And then the ethics behind you get so complete isolation versus not. So it's not so much just we don't have the research, but it's also very difficult to conduct that kind of research, to find things out definitively.
But back to the sort of screen time question, if you're spending time, if you have a toddler and you're using FaceTime to talk to grandma, or you're playing with them on a game, or you're reading a book on Kindle to them, that's a completely different experience than if you've got a kid stuck in the corner and they're entertaining themselves on something that's may or may not be age appropriate. On the other hand, that's probably better than having a kid outside where he's going to get run over in the street. So, there's always a trade-off, but it really is about how you're using it. It's about intention and purpose more than time. And I love that you all ask questions. Thank you for participating too.
Any other questions? Because I do know we're at the time boundary, but we will be available if you have anything else. Otherwise, want to thank you all for joining us today. Really great discussion. And we look forward to continuing to hear your ideas and thoughts.
Yeah, I know, Jerry Lynn, you've been facing a lot of challenges watching your